Welcome to the Hotelligence Podcast, your strategic vantage point on the changing landscape of hotel safety. Hosted by Jim Kortz, a retired FBI DHS investigator, and Don Carr, a former frontline security owner-operator with years of first-hand incident response experience on hotel properties. Every episode brings you closer to understanding the full picture and what the future may hold. Let's begin.
Thank you for joining us on episode 13 of the Hotelligence Podcast, when patterns finally have a place to go. Over the last 12 episodes, we've talked about things hotel operators recognize immediately. Not headlines, not hypotheticals, day-to-day realities.
The things you notice during a shift, the things that get written down, and the things that quietly stall out afterward.
And if you've been listening and thinking, okay, now what? That question makes sense.
Because awareness alone doesn't resolve anything. So let's talk about the gap hotel operators live with. Most hotels don't face these challenges because they don't care. They face them because there hasn't been a safe, neutral place for the patterns to exist.
So observations stay isolated in a shift log, in a notebook, in someone's memory.
Even when something does get documented, it often stops right there.
Not because it isn't important, but because moving it forward feels risky.
Legally, operationally, and reputationally.
So the most defensible move becomes leaving it where it is.
Neutrality doesn't mean ignorance. Hotels are neutral spaces by design. They're not investigators, they're not enforcement, and they're not meant to draw conclusions about people.
But neutrality doesn't mean nothing is noticed. Patterns still emerge. Repeated behaviors still surface, and concerns show up again and again.
The issue has never been whether operators see these things.
It's been what they're allowed to do with what they see.
So for years, operators have been asking versions of the same question.
How do we acknowledge what we're seeing without labeling anyone? How do we preserve information without escalating too early? How do we stay prepared without stepping outside our role?
What's underneath all of that is something simpler.
Where can awareness safely live? Why urgency's never been the answer? Well, in hospitality, urgency creates pressure. Pressure creates exposure, and exposure creates liability.
So systems evolved to slow things down, soften language, and limit movement of information.
Those constraints weren't failures. They were protective responses.
But over time, something else became clear.
Without structure, urgency doesn't solve risk. It multiplies it. So what's different now? We're not here to announce anything.
And we're not here to promise outcomes.
But we are here to acknowledge a shift.
For the first time, the gap we've been discussing has a place designed specifically to hold it.
Not to trigger action, not to force decisions, not to create urgency.
Yeah, just to let patterns exist, responsibly, neutrally, and without pressure.
So next week, we'll be at AAHOACon, and many operators will recognize this conversation immediately.
Because they've been managing this gap quietly for years.
Not asking for speed, asking for structure. So the season has been about naming realities.
The next chapter is about what happens when those realities are finally given structure.
Before urgency, before reaction, before escalation.
Because in environments built on neutrality, structure has to come first.
So if you're heading to AAHOACon, we'll be there.
You'll recognize the moment when this conversation surfaces. So that's episode 13 of the Hotelligence Podcast.
Next episode, we'll talk about why structure matters more than urgency and what goes wrong when that order is reversed. And remember, we're in this together.
And together, we make hospitality stronger.
We publish a short written insider briefing alongside each episode. It goes out on Wednesdays when the episode drops. If that's useful, the link is in the show notes.
Thank you for joining the Hotelligence podcast, where experience informs smarter, safer hotel operations and prepares you for what comes next. Stay informed, stay confident, and stay connected. As the conversation evolves, Jim Cords and Don Carr will highlight developments that help hotels strengthen their approach to safety and risk management. See you next episode.